The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone, to tonight's public webinar for the Mars Retrograde in Aquarius Capricorn transit coming up. This is Media Monk, better known as Leroy, the General Manager for EAN. I'm joined by, of course, Star Lady on the podcast, but we all know her as Kim Marie, the Managing Director for the network. And we're going to start here in just a moment. But I thought I'd take some time just to kind of let everybody know that are newer to this webinar format. You're going to see a little control panel that showed up on your computer screen. There's an orange arrow on top, and you can click on that to allow it to expand. You'll see a Q&A panel, a chat panel, some other functionality there. Don't get too confused, but just know that you can ask a question, a relevant question, in third-person vernacular. This is not a session to compare your chart with us. It's just we're interested in exploring this Mars retrograde in depth. So if you have a question, if it's relevant, I'll pass it on to Kim Marie. And also wanted to let you know other forecasting webinars on our forecasting webinars page. We've done the Saturn and Capricorn ingress, the Chiron and Aries ingress, Uranus and Taurus. All of those, you're welcome to go get the PDF immediately after purchasing that product on our forecasting webinars page. And that PDF contains links to all the media. In other words, the MP4 file, the YouTube video, if you will, and a couple of audio videos on that first page. You can print out slides. A great amount of research that we have to acknowledge Star Lady or Kim Marie for putting into these forecasting webinars. So take advantage of that. Go get your archetypes and cycles of each of those ingresses, and then your personal house transit should be pretty clear there. If not, just email MediaMonk@evolutionaryastrology.net. Welcome for joining us, and I'll turn it over to Kim Marie.
All right, welcome everyone to our Mars retrograde webinar. As you can see on your screen, Mars just went retrograde in Aquarius yesterday. We are recording this June 27th. So Mars retrograde in Aquarius Capricorn, June 26th through August 27th. It went retrograde at 9 degrees Aquarius, and it'll go retrograde all the way back to 28.5 degrees Capricorn. Before we get started into our material for this webinar, first of all, here's our housekeeping slide here at Evolutionary Astrology Network. You can study with us 3 different ways. You can listen to our free weekly audio podcast that we post on our website. We post it on iTunes, and we have recently started posting it on YouTube as well. Our Astro Library contains all the information that we have accumulated over the last couple of decades by myself, other evolutionary astrologers, various workshops, webinars, you name it. And you can see we've divided it into 3 sections. You can subscribe 1 month, 6 months, or 12 months, or you can do a monthly recurring that you can cancel at any time in any combination, 1 section or all 3 sections all together. And of course, we have our Evolutionary Astrology course that we currently have 3 segments for. Segment 1, Philosophy. Segment 2, Relationships, are available digital only. They're available material only, as you see the DVDs and binder on your screen. Or segments 1 and 2 can come both ways, the materials, the DVDs, and digital access. Segment 3, Health and Wellness Astrology, is only available by the materials and DVDs at this point. We also, over this last winter, just finished up I think I added it up at one point. I did somewhere like 64 hours of webinars over the winter and into the spring, and this was the main part of it. Saturn's in Capricorn, 2017 through 2020. Chiron is in Aries, 2018 through 2026. And I think Uranus is in Taurus, 2018 through 2025. So we've got a couple of longer cycles. You can break it down and buy just part 1 1, or you can buy the specific house you want in part 2. You can buy the whole works. You go to our website and you click on the forecasting webinars page, and it'll take you to all of these transiting planet series that we did. So let's go down memory lane for a moment. I can remember that it was several weeks before the 2016 US presidential election, and maybe it might have been a month. It was a couple of months before the election that my mother told me she was going to vote for Donald Trump. And she was a big Hillary fan for years, and she's a lifelong Democrat, and it put me into shock. Of course, Mars was still transiting through Capricorn, but it made me start looking at the US election chart, which was November 8th. And at the beginning of the morning of the election, Mars was at 29 blah blah Capricorn, and at the end of the election night, Mars ingressed into Aquarius. And I saw that again a few weeks before the election, and I thought, uh-oh, we're in trouble. And then when, who was it, FBI Director James Comey did the last minute Hillary email investigation, and then came out and said, oh no, never mind. It was just like that whole last week, I was like going into concern. And probably like many of you, election night and the morning that we woke up, we all experienced individually and collectively Mars in Aquarius trauma. So here we are, one Mars in Aquarius cycle later. And this time we're going to have a Mars retrograde in Aquarius. So we get to review what happened one cycle later. And what we can look at 2 years later, as Mars went through Aquarius for the first time since election night, there is the possibility that individually and collectively, more and more people can start to objectify, which is an Aquarius word, the past and what actually happened. Now, there will be the Trump diehards that will, follow him to hell and back. And then there'll be a lot of those in the middle that just were tired of the Clintons, didn't know what to think, and can now go, oh gosh, look what we did. So I just thought if each of us remembered the last time Mars was in Aquarius and what happened with its ingress, might be a little inkling of what we can go through during this Mars transit. Mars will be going through Aquarius for 5 months. So it's there now. It's going to go back to Capricorn, and then it'll go back into Aquarius. So it's a total of 5 months altogether. But Mars is going to be in only 2 signs, Capricorn and Aquarius, for 1/3 of its 2-year cycle. 8 months, Capricorn Aquarius, out of a 24, 26-month Mars cycle. So Mars really slows down and intensifies as it goes through its retrograde in whatever signs that takes place. Here is the dates and degrees for you from the last Mars conjunction, summer 17, to the next one 2 years later in late summer 2019. What's probably most important for most of us is the fact that Mars went into shadow May 12th when I hit 28 Capricorn. Here's the retrograde we spoke about yesterday. Here is the opposition to the Sun, July 27th, 4 degrees Leo Aquarius. We're going to have a lot to talk about that last week of July. Mars direct, August 27th, 28 Capricorn. And it leaves shadow October 8th when it makes 9 Aquarius again. Now, it just so happens June 27th, we are having a full moon of Capricorn, We're going to have a full moon or lunar eclipse right before this opposition. And we're going to have the full moon a couple of days before Mars goes direct. So turning both directions and the opposition to the sun, all of that is sandwiched around full moons, one of them a lunar eclipse. Now, I just will point out to you that any planet that has a retrograde cycle, the highlight of that retrograde is when it either conjuncts, as in Mercury, Venus, or opposes the sun, as in Mars and the outer planets. These planetary retrogrades are always also when the planet is closest to Earth. So it shines brightest in the sky. If it is an outer planet, say Mars on out, we notice the planet when it's retrograde because it is closest to Earth and brightest. So here's your dates. Mars went into Capricorn mid-March through mid-May, went into Aquarius mid-May through August 12th, 3 months. It will retrograde back into Capricorn 1 month, and then it will spend 2 more months in Aquarius. So again, you can see on your screen a total of 8 months in just 2 signs of the zodiac. By the time we get done with a Mars retrograde cycle, we're usually a little worn out from the energy of whatever sign or signs it went retrograde in. Well, we'll look at some of those details in a little bit. Quickly, Mars astronomy. A little less than 2 years to go around the sun. Its revolution around the zodiac, because Earth's moving at the same time too, is anywhere from 24 to 26 months. It only has 1 retrograde cycle in that revolution around the zodiac. The retrograde lasts from 58 to 81 days. This one is only 2 months. It's a short Mars retrograde cycle. Yaha! When it turns stationary retrograde or stationary direct, it will appear to stand still in the sky for 3 days on each end. Now, the Mars retrograde cycles go forward in the signs of the zodiac, and more recent ones, we've had it going forward 1 sign of the zodiac, as you can see on your screen here. But sometimes it'll skip a sign and go into every other one, but it's always moving forward in the zodiac. Now, we haven't had a Mars retrograde in Aquarius since the early 1970s. And I think the next Mars retrograde in Aquarius after this one is going to be in the 2030s. So we don't have it retrograde in the same sign very often. It doesn't make that 8-year 5-pointed star or pentagram like the Venus retrograde cycles do. Here's how Mars is seen from the sky. Here is Earth moving around, and Earth moves faster than Mars. So as Earth starts to move faster, when you extrapolate this out to the sky, it appears as though Mars will slow down and go backwards in the sky before it goes forward again. Here's another way of looking at it. I show this one with all my planetary retrograde cycles. Same thing, just a few more lines and putting it more in a zigzag than it is a circle. But this is what you would see if you were outside every evening looking at the planet in the skies and actually plotting it with your eyeballs. Now, here's something about Mars as well. This particular Mars cycle, it is going to be out of bounds. Now, what is that? Planets are considered out of bounds when their declination, which is either north or south of the equator, goes beyond the sun's declination. When we're at the Tropic of Cancer, which is where the sun just entered into Cancer a few days ago last week, that's when it's the furthest north of the equator. It's 23 degrees and 27 minutes north. That's where the Tropic of Cancer is in latitude if you look at a globe of the Earth. Opposite time period, the winter solstice, the sun 0 degrees Capricorn, 23-27 south of the equator. Well, where's Mars? Aquarius, Capricorn. So Mars is south declination, and it will go further south than the sun July 7th through September 24th. Now, astrologers have a tendency to say that when a planet is out of bounds, it's out of control, it gets wild, it acts out in expansive means. In EEA, we like to say this can happen good or bad. So it will intensify everything about the archetype of Mars. You know, Mars is, you know, can be a good leader with social activism, but Mars is the planet of war traditionally. So we can go to either extreme with that. And the fact that we got Mars retrograde during this time period, and we're going to have 3 eclipses on the north node of the moon during this time period, it makes for a lot of excitement. And I can just say right off the bat, with Aquarius being an air sign and ruling the brain, ruling the central nervous system, co-ruling the nervous system in general with Mercury, add in a Mercury retrograde to all this energy as well. It behooves us to be able to take some big, deep breaths and calm down, detach, get exercise, have some fun sexually with yourself or with others, preferably in mutually agreeable ways, to release the buildups of energy that happen during Mars retrograde. Now, that maximum declination to the south is going to be August 14th to the 19th, and I realized I did not put the degrees in for you, so let me quickly get that for you, and we will look it up. It's going to, Mars is going to go all the way to 25, 26 degrees south declination. So again, just makes things even more exciting. So Mars archetype, quickly, active polarity, energy moving out from the center, cardinal modality, initiation, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, the element of fire, that sense of creativity, special sense of destiny. It rules the first archetype, Aries, in the first house. So it's the baby of the zodiac. It is that instinctive desire to act and become. And with the first fire element, Aries, that sense of destiny is unknown. So the Mars archetype wants the complete freedom to go in any direction it has an instinctive hit to move towards. And when Mars doesn't have the freedom to just act however it wants to act, it gets frustrated, it gets angry. It doesn't matter whether or not its freedom is actually contained. Mars just has to feel like it is. Now, Mars is always the leading edge of the conscious desire nature. And in evolutionary astrology, we know the soul and Pluto as having a dual desire nature, separating and returning desires. Separating desires, anything and everything. House, lover, car, whatever. Returning desire or returning desires is to take the house, the lover, the car, and to use it as a tool to return to source. And then ultimately, the returning desire is to return back to universal source. Now, in evolutionary astrology and other types of astrology, I think too, Mars-Pluto make a real strong planetary pair together. Traditional astrologers will say, well, Mars used to rule Scorpio in the 8th house. Now Pluto rules it. In EA, we say Pluto, the soul, its desire nature is unconscious, and those desires are made conscious via Mars, and not with a product necessarily of forethinking. It's just the spark flies within us, and we want to act upon it, and we want to create it. And so what is Mars retrograde going to do? Make us review those desires. Make us throw off old separating desires that no longer serve us. Mars is that process of discovering ourself, where we are always in that state of becoming. Or you could even say evolution itself, that instinctive energy to create, become, evolve. Mars is also that subjective consciousness and an egocentric level. So, not saying that Mars is not conscious, it just has a tendency to operate quite instinctively, action followed by reaction. And the reaction to the action is what gives us more awareness of ourself and who we are and who we are not. And of course, this all gets tipped upside down when Mars is retrograde. Mars is also one of the planetary energies that rule the sexual instinct. It rules it along with the planet Pluto. And just to clarify here, all 12 signs of the zodiac operate sexually. Okay? So don't think because you got natal Mars in a certain house or sign, you don't have any sexual energy. Everything in the chart comes together to play with that sexual energy. But Mars is that instinctive desire to act out the sexual energy. And of course, when Mars is in the active polarity, and we can also call those the masculine signs, energy moving outward and initiating. When Mars is in the passive polarity, some will call that the feminine signs, and that's energy moving inward. Aries out, Taurus in, Gemini out, Cancer in. You can follow it around the zodiac. So transiting Mars is going to be the leading edge of our soul's evolution, including its desires, and it's also going to be the leading edge of our sexual evolution. And when Mars is retrograde, regardless of the sign, we have got to utilize the sexual energy to release on sexual and emotional levels. Now, Mars in Aquarius sexually can sometimes be aloof, can sometimes be detached, can sometimes need a lot of mental or visionary imagination and excitement and verbalization to help it find that sexual release energy. Mars retrograde in Capricorn is going to be kind of the opposite. You know, Capricorn is consensus pressure to conform. And in our patriarchal distortions, a lot of Capricorn energy gets suppressed. So Mars retrograde in Capricorn, we can find that sexual energy repressed. And as it's retrograde, that energy wants to come out. And Capricorn rules the skin and the container of the skin. So both the Capricorn Cancer polarity are very sensitive to touch. So whereas Mars retrograde in Aquarius needs all kinds of sexual voyeurism, Mars retrograde in Capricorn goes, I have to feel safe with you before I can really open up and share my body with you. So just know that as Mars retrogrades through these two signs, and as it transits through these two signs for 8 months, just that little basic knowledge right there can kind of help you not get so triggered by your partner if you're in a relationship, by an old lover if they show up Mars retrograde, or if you are exploring the possibility of a new relationship during Mars retrograde. And by the way, if a new relationship or an old lover comes through Mars retrograde, I say proceed with caution. See where it's at the end of the retrograde cycle. And that means when Mars moves out of its post-shadow direct, which isn't going to be until October. And by then we're going to be in the shadow of the Venus retrograde. So we're already in the last 7 months of this year dealing with Mars, Venus, and relationships. Excuse me while I take a drink. And by the way, as Leroy said, you're always welcome to ask questions. You can type things into the question mark on your little panel, or you can raise your hand to ask a question live if you want to. You're always welcome to ask questions. So planetary retrogrades are Earth-centered phenomena. In other words, from our appearance here on Earth, again, they appear to slow down, go backwards before they go direct. As we discussed earlier, they seem to be more powerful because that's when the planet is closest to Earth. The planet retrograde causes a withdrawal from the status quo, from the consensus conditionings, so that we can break free and redefine that planetary archetype according to what feels natural for us on an individual basis. Mercury communications, Venus values and love, Mars our desires and actions. So planetary retrogrades offer an opportunity to break free and align with ourself. When a planet is retrograde, the answer is always meant to come from within us, even as we get feedback from the universe. A retrograde planetary archetype is non-static. It's in a perpetual state of change and evolution. So when you look at a planetary retrograde, the sign and house is going to define how it's manifesting. The opposite sign and house are going to give clarity and expression, or as we look at with Aquarius, some objectivity. Now, I will also say that if you were born with Mars retrograde, you will have a temporary harmony whenever transiting Mars is going through a retrograde cycle. The planetary energies in the sky are lining up with the energies that were in the heavens when you were born. And even this is true whether it's different signs and houses or whatever. It's the direction of the planets. Now, any planetary retrograde, this is accurate as well. We always must relate the transiting retrograde cycle back to the natal archetype. So as we're working through this Mars retrograde in Aquarius Capricorn, kind of keep in the back of your mind, where's your natal Mars? What signs it in? What house is it in? Is your natal Mars retrograde? What aspects do your natal Mars make? All that is going to be evolved by the Mars retrograde cycle in Aquarius Capricorn, whatever house it's in. So both are going to be activated. The transiting sign and house with Mars and the natal Mars signature. Now, in general, again, we are going to be throwing off old desires that no longer serve us. Secondly, this is where Mars retrograde must look at considered action versus the impulsive action of when it's direct. So if you look at Mars having natural rulership of Aries in the first house, and it's always wanting distinctively do, be, act, evolve, and it goes retrograde and it goes, oh, wait a minute, I got to stop and look at what will happen if I do X, Y, Z. This is not the easiest thing. You can see how this creates this frustration in the Mars retrograde, regardless of the sign. That's why I have a tendency to say Mars retrogrades are the toughest retrograde cycles to go through. And I'm speaking from experience because I typically do the Mars retrograde webinar before it goes retrograde. And with various family things going on, it was like, okay, here I am doing it the day after it turns retrograde on a full moon. It was pulling teeth to get myself to focus, to get my brain to think. At least I'm laughing about it, huh? So I'm like, okay, note to Kim Marie. Mars retrograde webinar is before Mars retrograde next time. So one more time, here's the dates for you. Okay. So again, we've got Mars in Aquarius. It's, you know, halfway through those 3 months there as it's turning backwards. Here's the actual chart of when Mars went retrograde first. And I just jotted down a couple of notes there for you. You know, again, according to this recording, this was yesterday. And so what did we have going on? The highlight of the Saturn retrograde cycle, its halfway point with its opposition to the sun happened right after Mars turned retrograde. We have Uranus in orb to squaring the nodes, and Mars in orb of these last quarter squares to Uranus. We'll look in detail. But we not only have Mars conjunct the south node, we have Venus conjunct the north node in Leo. So Mars alienation versus Venus love, and what can be happening if you've got relationships in your life. It can feel like all or nothing. It can just feel like everything is intense, everything gets expanded, everything can get blown out of proportion. You know, the Saturn Sun opposition with it retrograde, control struggles. The fact that we have Saturn and Pluto retrograde in Capricorn, that can be part of the throwing off of the control. If you've been watching the news, you've been seeing how we are having to deal with family values and traumas. We're starting to get the first bits of news of resource upsets coming through with Donald Trump and all his tariff wars. That is going to be increasing prices of all kinds of different items that we as consumers will purchase all over the world. One of the things that can also be happening is it can just feel like our support systems are gonna pull the rug out from underneath us. Now we've got that Jupiter trine to Neptune, where some of us are just going to want to be in denial. I'm not going to watch any of this stuff. I'm not going to look at any of this stuff. We may also have some of us with these trines, and of course, Neptune's freshly retrograde. Jupiter's finishing up its retrograde cycle to turn direct here. There may also be those of us that are really holding and energizing peace and universal love on planet Earth through these moments where we feel like things are going to explode or fall apart. But we have one, typically there's only one Venus-Mars opposition in my research. Venus can have a retrograde, you know, before or after Mars. They can have one or three conjunctions, but they typically only have one retrograde when Mars is in the process of its one opposition when Mars is in process of its retrograde cycle. More on this Mars conjunct the South Node as we move along here, all right? Mars retrograde in Aquarius. Shock, trauma, upsets that disrupt our life routines. We are at the 1-year anniversary of Leroy's sister losing her young adult son to a heart attack. And so on his side of the family, all of the siblings and siblings-in-law have decided that she had retired just before her son crossed over of a heart attack. He crossed over 2 months after she retired. So we're all taking various days of the week and distracting her, being with her, loving her, communicating with her, talking to her. While I was prepping, Leroy took her on a hike today, and she showed him Jeffy's journal from when he was in junior high or high school or something, and Uncle Leroy was his hero. Heroes and leaders belong in Aquarius. But the point is that shock and trauma can come along, and we can incorporate it if we're not making a strong effort to be able to detach and objectify. And so all of us, because Mars is our desire nature, we have to take a step back from our desires and look at what needs to change in our world. And included in that is going to be what we don't have an ability to change. You know, a mother can not bring a child back from spirit world. And so you can see how just intense and upsetting sometimes Mars retrograde. Aquarius rules trauma. And if we don't know how to process through it, then it gets attached to us. We can fracture off a part of our soul. We can carry this trauma with us and keep repeating it and repeating it and repeating it. And so Mars retrograde in Aquarius is about throwing off old traumas. So there can be some upsetting things from your childhood. There can be past life memories that pop up. You know, there can be old traumatic events and situations that pop up into consciousness. Your soul is ready and trying to throw them off. How well can you? What we have a tendency to do from the Leo polarity to Aquarius is defend ourselves. We will go into my perspective. What about me? Why don't you love me? Why did you leave me? How dare you die on me? And so it's not always easy. We've got to go over to that Leo polarity so that we can love ourselves and process through it. But at the same time, we have got to do that broader understanding of things to understand and move forward. So frustrations can increase because others do not see the same see any situation the same way we do, which is that Leo polarity. We can get into the Leo drama with the Aquarian trauma. You know, we can argue, we can, you know, play, you know, do you love me, do you not games. And so again, Aquarius being an air sign, it's going to intensify what Mars retrograde in general needs to do, which is think before acting. Okay, be careful. Don't blurt that out. You know, write the email in Word doc and set on it 24 hours, and then copy and paste it into the email and click send. So those types of things we have to look at. And we're going to be able, though, to become more aware if we make an effort. We can become more aware of any repeating patterns of thoughts and actions that are no longer serving us, and we want to make an effort to change. So what we have here is the potential to break free and decondition from consensus norms or consensus conditioning. And Mars, the freedom-seeking lover, intensifies that ability to break free, decondition. Those last quarter squares Mars makes to Uranus can bring upsets with food, clothing, shelter, resources. All of that stuff can come up for review as well because Uranus is in Taurus, Venus' sign. What do I really need in my world? How should I operate my budget? You know, it's well known that most of us have money scripts or money beliefs. And almost all of our beliefs around resources involve emotions. So how well can Mars in Aquarius help you detach and kind of slow down and ponder something? I'm going to give a little example here. Yeah, Leroy, Leroy. We were camping last weekend, and we had a family member let us borrow a camper. And luckily, because 2 out of our 3 days it rained, one day rained a lot. And so we got all excited about, you know, pop-up campers because, you know, easier to pack, easier to camp. We love to hike and camp in the hills. And my sweetie pie, we came home from camping, and the last couple of days, he was just yak, 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 and he was going to go out and sign on the dotted line. And I'm like, I am not buying a camper when Mars goes retrograde, honey. So we can ponder this through the Mars retrograde. So those squares to Uranus is going to say, how well can you detach you know, break free emotionally and really have, you know, an objective pondering of how you want to spend your resources through Uranus and Taurus. We don't know when the upsets are going to come. They're definitely going to come. Either the beginning of August when Uranus goes retrograde, we will still have Mars retrograde, or it could be after Uranus dips back into Aries and comes back into Taurus the second time, May 19. We don't know for sure, but most astrologers feel, you know, kind of be careful with your budgets because upsets can happen. So look at where transiting Mars in Aquarius, Capricorn turns retrograde for you in a specific house. Are you having any upsets in that area? How can you take a broader picture of it? Can you step back and go, oh, that's what's going on? Can you go over to the opposite house where Leo and Cancer are and go, well, this is the area where I need to love myself better so that I can then go back to the Mars transit house and move through whatever's going on in a calmer perspective.
Are you suggesting I was not calm when I wanted to buy a pop-up camper?
No, I'm not saying you weren't calm, but you were so excited and you just wanted to go shopping.
I have a new phase. Mars in Aquarius, new phase. My Mars retrograde in Pisces. So, of course, I wanted
I
to jump on
know.
the bandwagon.
You're born with Mars retrograde, and of course you just, you know, hey, let's go do it. But you're married to a Mars direct, okay? Mm-hmm. And then, of course, whatever's going on in that Aquarius Leo polarity by houses, again, those are what's stirring it up. But what they're ultimately evolving is wherever your natal Mars signature is, sign, house, aspect. You know, I have Mars in Libra. You know, I'm always wanting to be considerate of somebody else. It's in the opposite sign of Mars rulership. And so people say, Kim Marie, just make your mind up, would you? And so this Mars retrograde in Aquarius is kind of having me, you know, detach a little bit from always considering everybody else and go, oh, maybe I should look at it more from my perspective. You know, again, the examples can be endless. I'm just trying to give you the mechanisms on how you can intuit this for yourself. And of course, in general, the Leo polarity is always, always going to be about deeply loving ourselves. And then we love others with healthy boundaries, equally giving and receiving. So whenever Mars gives you a traumatic upset, it's to go inward and hold your own heart and breathe and love yourself. I love me, I love me, I love me, I love me. I love me unconditional. I love myself no matter what. And if the distortions of that Leo polarity is if we can go into increased classism, social inequality, selfishness, narcissism. I forgot to mention that word, attention-seeking actions that, you know, notice me, because I don't have it within my depth to love myself to be able to objectify and notice you. That classic give to another as they want to receive versus projecting what you want to give on to them. That's the distortion and the natural essence of, again, unconditionally loving and giving as someone wants to actually receive. Now, when it comes to Mars retrograde in Aquarius being all about deconditioning and liberating, remember, we have 3 reactions. We can resist. We can want to go backwards and repeat yesterday. We can cling to the past. We can cling to that old desire we don't want to release. We can do the 180 of that and just go for the change all the way and throw the baby out with the bathwater as we move forward into our new world or our new desire or our new relationship. Typically what happens, even when we go through Mars retrograde in Aquarius, is we'll change in ways that feel safe or exciting, that we want to change, and we'll resist in the ways that feel fearful or we don't want to change. So we do a little of each typically. But again, the whole thing about this deconditioning and liberating is to break free and to become more objective and detached. So we're learning how to resist society. I'm not going to let society tell me who to be or what to do. And we also then, as we're deconditioning, breaking free, detaching, we're learning to see ourselves outside of the space-time situation we belong to. We can step outside of the country we were born in, and how is this Mars retrograde being activated in another country, in another continent? Again, the detachment is helping us become more and more and more objective. It's not trying to just freeze us, fixed air. It's not trying to make us cold and aloof. It's trying to help us see the bigger picture and see where we fit into that larger picture. Now, of course, from the perspective of the U.S., nodal axis, North Node Leo, South Node Aquarius, transiting North Node Leo, South Node Aquarius, very, very activated this summer and fall. So there's a lot of waking up in regards to social issues and people deciding where they stand on a social issue and wanting to get involved. So this Mars retrograde can bring new friends. It can bring social activism. It can bring leadership. It can bring the need to recognize where we have to make major radical changes in our world. This is the 28-year-old Alexandria. And I don't know how to pronounce her last name, but I was raised in a small farming community called Alexandria. And so I remember that word. She just won her Democratic primary yesterday in a New York district and beat a 10-term incumbent. I want to say Congress, because 10 times 6 would be 60 years. So it must be 2 years. He's got to be representative with 2-year terms. And she ran as a Democratic socialist, or social democrat. Democratic socialist, I think is what it is. Ran on healthcare for all and, all of the progressive things. Mars can throw all this stuff up in the air. It can energize those who want to progressively move forward, to go for it, Uranus. It can also energize, especially when it goes back into Capricorn, those who are afraid of social change and progressive ideas, that resisting change Saturn. So stay tuned. It is going to be an extremely active summer and fall with the eclipses, Mars out of bound, Mars retrograde, Mercury retrograde, the Venus retrograde. I have been saying for 2 years, since the last Mars ingress the day after the election, social activism. We will only see the change to the degree that each and every one of us want to be socially active. So social change occurs when enough people of like mind bond together to enforce the change within and relative to outmoded structures of society. And when I was looking for some artwork, I just put in social change and I came across this and I thought, oh, I talk this a lot, the old biblical, parable, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach him to fish and, you feed him for a lifetime. So here, give a family a fish and it's a charitable act. Teach a family to fish and they got sustainability. Organize a community-based intergenerational fishing collective and you have social change. I like the third one. Oh. Now, here's where Mars is going to retrograde back into Capricorn on August 12th through September 10th. It'll be a month there and then it'll go direct August 27th. Okay. So we've already had Mars in Capricorn for 2 months, mid-March to mid-May, and had conjunctions to Saturn and Pluto and trying to initiate our desire nature and self-responsibilities, Capricorn. Well, now here it's going to retrograde back later this summer. And so we'll have a lot of power struggles intensify because Aquarius is the rebel and Capricorn is the plutocrats and the power, and the control. And so Mars retrograde in Capricorn is wanting to throw off power, throw off control, throw off the structures. And added on to that, we have Saturn in Capricorn, balsamic Pluto in Capricorn. Now, the good thing is they're both retrograde, okay? So that retrograde is having them break down old realities and structures. I keep saying from the collective perspective or the broader perspective, realities that are no longer sustainable are just going to break down. And I will speak to this in regards to something else in a little few more slides here too. But it's just going to create this reactionary measure of those who have the power or the control, or who fear that, conservative social principles are just, falling away. They're going to dig in. They're going to hold down. Okay. And so stay tuned. We'll see it go both directions through this Mars retrograde. We'll see a doubling down to, keep, corporate America not paying any taxes, for instance. But we can also see something get exposed so outrageously, such as children being separated from their parents at the border, that it just in, the blink of an eye creates a shift in the realities, the power structures. I don't see this familial immigration issue of separating parents and children leaving the news. They did it so quickly. They did it so hodgepodge. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. They didn't care about making sure this person could know where that person was. A judge did a ruling today that said, you got to have this figured out in 2 weeks and 4 weeks, blah, 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 blah. I just, as I look at the planets, I go, oh, this is going to come to a head again with Mars retrograde Capricorn and then going direct the end of August. And then the day of the midterm elections, the nodes are going to switch into Cancer Capricorn. So they've created a mess that's just going to rear its head many, many times. All of us can be triggered, Mars, on a very personal level. And that's what did it, because, we were already in the Mars pre-shadow as this started happening. And we were in Mars in Capricorn through some of this as well. And so how are we as a society in the United States going to nurture our children? All societies can be looking at this some way, somehow. On a personal level, when Mars is retrograde back into Capricorn for that month, we can have things in our own family of origin come up again. Something with our adult parents, something with the adult children, something with how we parent our children. Who's the nurturing parent? Who's the authoritarian parent? How are we going to work our way through this as healthy as possible? It's all going to come down to that Cancer polarity. How will we love and nurture children? And if we can't take care of the children, what does that say about us as a society. And I can even see, even though education gets quite involved with the whole Sagittarius archetype, I'm seeing this whole teacher pay, Pluto Capricorn, Saturn Capricorn, Mars retrograde in Capricorn. We can see that start to come up as well. And that might extrapolate out to even, well, there are others who don't even get paid as much as teachers. What about them? Stay tuned. We'll see when those nodes go into Cancer Capricorn through 2019, part of 2020. So, as I said, Saturn and Pluto are going to fight to maintain the control. And yet, just by Mars retrograde in Capricorn, things will get shook up. If you've been following the news, there was a Supreme Court justice who announced his retirement the end of this summer, which is the end of their terms, their annual terms. And he was nominated by a Republican president, but he was known as a moderate. And so it's possible it's going to swing the U.S. Supreme Court to a extreme conservatism, 6-3 each vote. 6-3 conservatives, liberal. That will have its own reaction in shaking things up and moving things forward. Again, I'll address this in a few more slides. But Mars retrograde in Capricorn is going to shake up outer securities. And the Cancer polarity, it throws us into inner security. So Mars has got to reach for emotional self-reliance during that month, mid-August to mid-September, when it's going through Capricorn. So kind of be aware of that. As it's retrograde in Aquarius, how are you being triggered? How are you being traumatized? How can you reach over and love yourself, Leo? And then when it goes retrograde into Capricorn, Cancer polarity, even deeper loving of self and creating inner security. So I think combined that Aquarius, Capricorn, all kinds of communities, states, countries, social groups, they're going to find various ways to come together to change political and corporate structures. The exclusionary groups will want more protectionism and nationalism. The inclusionary groups will start to come together. So, for instance, this Alexandria, who won as a social democrat or whatever it is, she had banded with MoveOn.org. She had, in other words, all these various different groups came together to support her, and these various, socially progressive groups. Not that conservatives aren't doing the same thing. These socially progressive groups are recognizing we'll achieve more together than separately. And Mars retrograde will stir all this up. And like even in progressive groups, it can stir things up to change their corporate structures. For instance, ACLU in the United States, the American Civil Liberties Union, they had kind of evolved into just being lawyers and fighting court cases. And after the presidential election in 2016, they decided that they needed to start becoming more progressive in fighting for the changes that they want to see happening. So it's not so much their corporate structure was shook up, but that it was expanded so that they were being proactive in creating what they wanted to see in the country rather than trying to just defend conservative things from happening. Now, here's the Mars opposition to the Sun. I'm going to stop for a little drink of water. I forgot to bring my clock. Okay, I'm looking at the time in my room. I do have a clock in the room, so I'm keeping track of it. That last week of July is going to be very, very active. As you can see, when Mars retrograde has its highlight with its opposition to the sun at 4 degrees Aquarius Leo, it's going to be pretty darn close to the South Node. And you can see here June 26th again. The day before that, Mercury is going to turn stationary retrograde in Leo. And it is going to, here's the other thing. I did a free lecture on Uranus bisextile Pluto. If you're not aware of it, you can go search for it on the internet. I don't have a lot of detail, but if it's, let's look at this chart. Here's Pluto, 19.5 retrograde Cap. Here's Uranus, 2.5 Taurus, okay? Uranus has moved 102 degrees or a bisextile away from Pluto. Bisextiles are the harmonics of 7. They are realignment. So we were all excited about the Uranus-Pluto waxing squares and busting forth, and we didn't see it move forth as much as we want. There will be 7 Uranus-Pluto bisextiles between 2018 and I think 2021. So you talk about a time period to realign with where we want to go socially as any group of people or as a country or whatever. These are added on to the Mars opposition. And then the next day, we have a lunar eclipse that comes along. I use the US Gemini rising chart, 2:13 a.m. July 4th. As you can see, the inner wheel is that chart. The outer wheel is the lunar eclipse. That happens the day after the Mars retrograde to the sun. So that last week of July, active, active, active. We have Mercury retrograde within orb of opposing the U.S. moon in Aquarius, which is the court of public opinion, the mass consciousness of the public, as I like to say. Uranus is in orb of squaring the natal nodes to the U.S. And of course, what's happening? The full moon or lunar eclipse is on the U.S. natal nodes, and the transiting nodes are there. Mars is there as well. Look at how active this makes things in the United States. Thank you, international listeners, for allowing me to use the US as my examples. Think of how, well, there'll be some traumatic news. Will the Mueller investigation to obstruction by the Trump campaign bring forth facts that something should be charged, he should be charged with something? Well, we have our social activism starting to just take off. The thing that did happen with this young gal, she was only 28, her Saturn return, who won this primary in New York, I mean, it shocked the Democratic Party. So the Democratic Party is in a sense of shock because they've been bought and paid for by corporate America, just like the Republicans. And so here's this wave of young kids, the Pluto Virgos, Libras, Scorpios. Here's this wave of the progressive youth. What is it? Something like 3/4 of young adults between 18 and 35 align themselves with democratic principles. So you can just see how this is shaking things up for the US. Stay tuned. We'll see where it goes. There are those who felt that this Saturn square to the sun and this Mars square to Neptune both spoke to this whole dichotomy or battle in the US between including, give me your charge, you're poor, you're hungry, or excluding, let's just create a genocide of the Native Americans. You know, we've had both in our country. And as transiting Pluto and transiting Saturn get closer and closer to this natal Pluto, wow, how will we rebirth as a country? Well, stay tuned for the shakeups this summer. Here's the lunar eclipse in Donald Trump's chart. And by the way, I have to give credit. Oh gosh, I'm not going to remember who the author was. Oprah, the latest issue of Oprah, there was an author who wrote an article on this. I had studied that Saros series in the US eclipse last fall, but I have not looked at the Saros series of any of the eclipses this year. This North Node lunar eclipse is going to be a Saros series 129. Many of you know Donald Trump was born under a lunar eclipse. That eclipse was Saros series 129 as well. And he's had 2 previous Saros 129 eclipses, and each time they were very active. The birth of his daughter, the building Trump Tower, the death of his father, you know, all kinds of various things that have happened. I've just looked at Mars turning stationary retrograde, 9 Aquarius opposing his Pluto. I've looked at the transiting nodal axis. I've looked at the lunar eclipse. I'm just going, your day of reckoning is going to come sooner or later. Stay tuned. And then what happens again, July 25th, 26th, Mercury goes retrograde, 23.5 Leo, 3 degrees or 2.5 degrees, whatever, from his natal Mars. So that, I'm wondering if this last week of July isn't going to be big news in some way, somehow. Does Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, decide to turn on him and give information to who's ever investigating him for his crimes? Does Paul Manafort turn to keep himself out of jail? He's been so sneaky, and this was Trump's first campaign manager, or second. He's been so sneaky that the courts have actually jailed him until trial because he's trying to influence witnesses in his trial. You tell me there isn't some old hoodlum mafia stuff working. You're getting the point. There's a lot of excitement going on the last week of July in the skies, in the US chart, in Donald Trump's chart, maybe in some of your charts as well. My husband has a lot of Leo in his chart. I bet you he's looking at his chart throughout this, aren't you, honey? Thank you for letting me drink water. So whenever there's a Mars retrograde, the inner planets, Mercury and Venus, are always with the sun and have oppositions to Mars. Because again, Mercury's never more than 29 degrees from the sun. Venus is never more than 48 degrees from the sun. So we already had that Venus opposition to Mars right on the summer solstice. You know, it's kind of still an orb as Mars has turned stationary retrograde. We can see where Mercury's opposition to Mars comes. We can see the sun. And so in general, when all these inner planets are hanging out close together to some degrees and opposing Mars, you know, it really it kind of activates the Mars retrograde, and it activates the polarity point, which in this case is Leo, and says, wait a minute, you've got to look at things. And there's this back and forth between me, myself, and I personally, Leo, and the group or collective or other that I'm involved with. And so back and forth and back and forth. But the Leo planets are getting Mars in touch with what it really wants and desires, what it values. It's telling us that we're having to learn ourselves inwardly, and then Mars and Aquarius, we can act upon what is best for ourselves and others. Of course, you know the distortions as we've been talking about them, the Leo dramas, and creating an even more trauma and or separation. Now, The Leo Aquarius axis activates the natal US nodal axis as well. If you saw that in the chart, whether you use the Gemini rising or the Sibley, both July 4th charts, the North Node 6.5 Leo, South Node 6.5 Aquarius. So here again, collective social perspectives are changing. Are they evolving or de-evolving? Liberal or conservative? Resistance movements that have been rising up since the presidential election in 2016, we can easily see them starting to turn into leading rather than resisting. So far, most of the very progressive races have been done locally. Again, the young woman, Alexandria, who won the Democratic primary yesterday, is the highest ticket office to really come out there on such a progressive level. We can expect to see more of that. Stay tuned as to which one prevails. Mercury. The Mercury retrograde, July 25th through August 19th, 23 to 11 Leo. It's going to be an active Mercury retrograde, aspects to 7 planets. The only planets does not activate is Mars, which it did before the retrograde, and Uranus, which it would have 1 square before its shadow. So Mercury retrograde is going to up the ante again on what's going on with Mars. And it can, being in Leo, it can up the ante of me versus you when we want to look for what about me and you. Because Mercury retrograde in Leo is going to point towards Aquarius. What's best for all of us? Can we figure out how to get along? So however you want to take care of yourself, it then becomes how are you going to be a participant on planet Earth? And of course, we have a Venus retrograde this fall, October 5th through November 16th, 10 Scorpio all the way back to, or 11 Scorpio, that should be a 0 there, making a note on my typo. 11 Scorpio to 25 Libra. Venus is going to be active. It's going to aspect 7 planets in its retrograde cycle. Whew, we're going to need a winter solstice just to recharge our batteries, huh? What are you talking about, Kim Marie? We just got the summer. So, you know, remember the Venus opposition to Mars? It's just a few days old, still in orb as Mars turned retrograde. Mars in Aquarius wants all this social action and change. And Venus retrograde in Scorpio Libra, but says, well, what about our relationship? So there's going to be this balancing between personal, intimate relationships and the incentive and pressure to participate collectively on planet Earth, however it's happening in your little group. Maybe it's just your little metaphysical group, or maybe it's just your book club and the books you are reading. It doesn't have to go all the way out to, you know, wanting to see political, social changes on planet Earth. But there's just a little bit of tension, not just from the opposition aspect, but from the signs that they're retrograde in. And what will happen is that as soon as Mars gets done with this retrograde cycle, and it really wants to start moving forward, before Mars gets out of post-shadow, Venus is going to move into pre-shadow. A Venus retrograde is once every 18, 19 months. Mars retrogrades are once every 2 years. So there's either a Venus retrograde before Mars or there's a Venus retrograde after Mars. And when Venus is retrograde after Mars, we have to take a longer review of what we desire and what we want to act upon, because the Venus retrograde is all about reviewing our values, and values create needs which then become the desires we act upon. Again, Venus values. What we value becomes important to us. We need it and we desire it. Mars is desires. Now, Venus, here's Venus from conjunction to conjunction with Mars. The Venus retrograde cycle will make 6 aspects to Mars. And only one of them will be Mars retrograde here. It will make a waning trine, and then it's going to have a last quarter square, retrograde, repeat them, and the Venus aspects to Mars will go all the way into next March. So that's going to be a long time period for Venus to reviewing its values in intimate relationships, Scorpio, Libra, as well as how it's going to participate socially. And if you think about it, when you get in an intimate relationship with someone, you know, is it your friends, their friends? Do you create new friends? Do you blend them together? Do you, compromise on your friends? Well, I'll go to a baseball game with you if you go to an astrology conference with me. That was Leroy and I in our early days. I'm going to learn baseball, you learn astrology, and we're going to socialize a little bit of both, So everybody's going to be moving through that, be it a seasoned relationship, be it the things that drives the relationship apart, be it the, beginnings of any type of intimate relationship. So they're going to go back and forth, waning trine to waning squares, then back to trine, then to squares. So the last quarter squares are going to emphasize what do we value, and especially in personal relationship. What are the best compromises for everyone involved? And if we will work through it when Venus is last quarter square to Mars, then we can see it be much smoother when the trines come, because those 3 Venus waning trines are all in air. Venus is in an air sign, Libra. Mars is in an air sign, Aquarius. And so the trines then can be that opportunity to have the communications, all the conversations. It can be conducive to creating and enhancing relationship intimacy. And of course, the trines can allow values and desires, Venus, Mars, to unfold as best for all concerned. So let me back up, okay? A trine square, a square trine, a trine square. So you might want to pay attention to these dates and just see how they start to come out for you. They're a little in tandem here, a month apart, except this one a little almost 2 months apart. But I would pay attention and make the effort with the squares to have the rewards of the trines. Mars is a waxing semi-sextile to Saturn, 30 degrees. Mars, even retrograde, is wanting to initiate those new desires off of that conjunction with Saturn in April, 9 degrees Capricorn. And as it turns retrograde, we're still going to try to move forward, and some things are going to work and some things are not going to work. And so Mars-Saturn is ultimately self-responsibility. So how are you taking charge of your world? How are you objectifying what you're responsible for, what you're not responsible for? If you have family members trying to lay guilt or conditions on you, can you break free, Mars retrograde? Can you stand up and do your share of the work if you've been slacking off? And so, again, Saturn in Capricorn, even when it's retrograde through some of these aspects, wants to hold on, and Mars wants to throw it off, break free. So that back and forth energy will continue with these aspects. What can happen when Mars goes from new phase to crescent phase is Mars can get insecure about what is trying to move forward into. And so hopefully by the time it gets to the third and final Oh no, that's semi squares, and this is a semi sextile. Sorry about that. It'll be after post shadow when Mars will run into a little bit of that insecurity with the crescent phase to Saturn and Pluto. Mars is a waning sextile to Chiron. This is the last quarter phase. And so last quarters is where we have to make efforts to understand things from broader and broader perspectives. And with Chiron involved, if Mars gets traumatized, Chiron is meant to initiate healing and to try and help us heal in new ways. So, for instance, can we do something once and for all about separating parents and children when they cross a border into a new country wanting to migrate or looking for asylum? We could see some possibilities of leadership here. So it's again, last quarter phase, waning sextile, broader understandings, and yet Chiron is in Mars sign of Aries. So I'm figuring out what I need to do in my little community to help something move forward. And so that, again, that leadership doesn't have to be running for office on a national stage. It can be just doing something within your family, within your small community, within, it can be on local, regional levels, however you feel best to be active. Here's probably the most intense, other than the Mars conjunct the South Node, here's these last quarter squares to Uranus. These are the real powder kegs. Last quarter squares are crazies in consciousness, trying to make sense of it all. And anytime our resources, Taurus, get shaken up, we can get traumatized, Mars. However, we can also recognize, wait a minute, we've got to make sure that everyone has universal health care in the United States. We have to make sure that no children go hungry. We have to make sure that everybody can have a living wage, if not a universal basic income down the road, as robots do more and more of the work. So here, Mars can be visionary and search for what's best for all, or it can ignore social needs. It can just go catatonic because it's so traumatized and paralyzed, I can't do anything. So Uranus is disrupting value systems and resource accumulations. Anytime you have 3 individuals own as much wealth as 3.5 billion individuals on planet Earth, we need to upset the wealth distribution. I've heard me say this one too. 3 individuals in the U.S. own as much wealth as half the U.S. citizens. Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and the Amazon guy. 8 individuals in the world own as much wealth as the bottom half, 3.5 billion. I want Uranus to disrupt resource accumulations. And this is where Mars can be a part of it. Now, distortions, of course, all the taking, hoarding, excluding others, but it can also be the war games, the tariff games, just upsetting the economy worldwide could happen with these tariff games. Stay tuned. We'll see. We don't know if Mars last quarter square Uranus is going to move us forward, move us backward, move us a little of each. We know we're going to shake it up, and we know that sooner or later there has to be a more equitable distribution of resources. The have-nots will only be able to take it so much before they will rise up out of necessity because they're hungry. So I probably said all this already. Yep. Oh, one more thing that I wanted to say. Last quarter, that crises in consciousness, Uranus and its rulership of Aquarius, 11th house, rules the individuated unconsciousness. So Mars retrograde in Aquarius, old unconscious issues are going to come to the surface again. Mars retrograde is throwing open the door to the unconsciousness when it's retrograde in Aquarius. And so what we want to do is readdress them instead of re-imprinting them. So you want to be paying attention to what pops up into consciousness again, into your thoughts. It can be from the past lives, the past in this life. You want to address the issue and heal it as best as possible so you don't re-imprint the trauma. You do the same thing with the present. If there's something that you're needing to address, some conversation, some action, something that you're needing to do, don't ignore it. Address it. Don't let it build up, Mars retrograde. And of course, if it's the blueprints to the future, you pay attention to the element of repetition, and the message comes forward again. It is the direction you're supposed to find the courage to act with. And it's okay to wait through most of the Mars retrograde, or at least wait through the first half of the Mars retrograde if you want to, before taking action. But the Mars aspect to Uranus, Mars retrograde in Aquarius, all kinds of unconscious stuff is going to pop up into the surface to be addressed, healed, liberated, and acted upon. Mars makes waning semi-squares to Neptune. This is moving from last quarter phase to a balsamic phase. And this is where we have got to surrender to deeper understandings, deeper, broader perspectives. The distortion is the trauma, Aquarius, and victimization. There's nothing I can do. So we want to be as objective as possible. And of course, with Pisces, accept self-responsibility in every area of life. One of my slogans for Neptune, Pisces in the 12th house is ultimate self-responsibility gives us ultimate freedom, which is what Mars wants. So as Mars is waning to Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, it can really help with that broadening into objectivity and understanding through the retrograde in Aquarius. We'll have our own Leo polarity, reactions and emotions and feelings, but we've got these outer planets to help understand a little deeper perspective. Now, here's the other thing that's really making the unconscious come to the surface as well. Here's the 3 Mars oppositions to the North Node in Leo, conjunctions to the South Node in Aquarius. And the South Node is the emotional past. And in Aquarius, it's the unconscious emotional past. And Mars retrograde, Mars going over that South Node, it is making it conscious just like the last quarter squares to the Uranus are doing. And as Uranus is squaring the nodes, it's in orb already, and it doesn't square the nodes till midterm elections. election day. I'll give you the slide on that. I only have a few more slides left. Thank you for your patience. But this is going to just be part of the Mars-Uranus squares. All kinds of old emotional stuff coming up. And there may be some world or earth events with the Mars-Uranus square and Mars conjunct the South Node. There can be social movements born. They can be social movements expanded. The U.S. nodal axis is activated all summer and fall by Mars retrograde, by the transiting nodes, and Uranus. By the way, transiting nodes conjunct the U.S. nodes was June 14th, Flag Day. 6.5 Leo Aquarius, if you remember. Here's Mars transiting over the U.S. nodal axis, because again, it's all right there, okay? Opposing the North Node, Leo, conjuncting the South Node, Aquarius. So the collective emotional unconsciousness, U.S. South Node, Leo, is going to be made conscious as well. Remember, the U.S. also has the moon in Aquarius for both July 4th charts. And the moon is the public, the court of public opinion, you know, as I have said. So here again, collectively, are we going to have more trauma? Are we going to have more upsets? Are we going to re-imprint them? Are we going to objectify and break free and move forward as social groups or individuals and societies? You know, what could be some of the Earth events? Now look at those dates that Mars is conjunct the U.S. South Node. We've already had the first one. The second one's coming in mid-July, just before that last week in July. I just expect July to be news. And of course, it's midterm elections. And we have, you know, progressives and Democrats trying to change the Republican majorities in Congress. Stay tuned. But we still have one more in October as well. So there can be things from the U.S. past that will come up to haunt us or to help us break free. And, you know, and here's the visual of it again from the perspective of the day of the lunar eclipse with, again, the transiting node with transiting Mars. We just looked at the dates of Mars over transiting nodes and Mars over U.S. nodes. As I you know, heard the news today, I went from being so excited with this young gal winning the primary to then having a Supreme Court justice announce retirement and Donald Trump gets to appoint someone. Will they push it through the Senate before midterm elections? Can there be a stalling until after midterm elections? And I was explaining astrology to someone in general, and I made the comment, I think it was yesterday, you know, if I didn't have awareness of astrology, I'd be depressed with what's going on planet Earth, or specifically in the United States, excuse me. But I have hope with the Pluto return. And then I got to thinking, I don't know why, I guess it was the Supreme Court justice. It made me think about the midterm elections. I've put this in a couple of slides. I just want to show you this, and the U.S. Constitution, which is my next slide. So here's election day with the polls opening from Washington, D.C., and Venus is going to square the nodes 3 times with its retrograde. Moon will square the nodes on election day. Uranus will square the nodes and slip back into Aries. And the nodes will slip into Cancer, Capricorn on election day. And then 2 days later, Jupiter will leave Scorpio and ingress into Sagittarius. you know, the moon's going to go into Scorpio on election day. That's the only thing other than Uranus that'll change signs, and Uranus retrograding back into Aries. I have hope with the midterm elections from this chart versus the one that I showed you first of all, memory lane. But I went and did some reading on the US Constitution because it popped into my head. If that Supreme Court goes extremely conservative, these young kids are going to change the Constitution. And I call them kids. I mean young adults. They are going to create either a constitutional convention, which we've never done other than creating this one that we did in 1789, or they're going to create a constitutional amendment that puts term limits on Supreme Court judges, maybe federal judges, maybe members of Congress. I see it coming. And so they did the Articles of Confederation in 1776-77 to give the states all the power because they were trying to break away from King George in England. But what they found over the next decade is the federal government couldn't do anything, and it ended up getting caught in, oh gosh, some other war, and it couldn't raise monies. So they realized that they had to create some type of national a constitution that all the states would agree to. And so that was the US Constitution. And so they had these congresses in New York, at New York City, over a couple of years. And it took a while. They needed to have, what was it, 9 states ratify it out of the 13. And it took a couple of years to do it, but they finally, they eventually had a unanimous ratification from the original 13 states, and then a couple more states came in after that. But it went into effect. The Constitution as we know it went into effect here on this date, March 4th, 1789 in New York, New York. No time, but they said on that day they're going to start doing business. So I just did the 8 to 5 time. But what I wanted to point out in the US Constitution, here's Pluto at 18 degrees Aquarius on the 18-degree, I think it's 09, 1802, 1809 with the Gemini rising chart. And so I know it's Mars retrograde in Aquarius, but it really got me thinking about Pluto moving into Aquarius down the road. Again, when I go through any little Aquarian trauma for myself, and if you follow me as an astrologer, you know I'm very collective. I am very broad-based. I am in it for the least of us. And so I look for what can give me hope. So, I mean, there's other things we could point out. Uranus on the North Node, you know, in Leo, and really moving forward that individualism as we're trying to do what's best for all of us. And here was the moon smack dab on Uranus. But so even our US Constitution is going to have a soul return. It's going to be a little ways away. It probably won't be till the early 2030s. But our young bloods will be alive. They will be making, you know, changes as time goes by. Excuse me. There have been amendments to the Constitution that have went unratified. For instance, the Equal Rights Amendment with genders, you know, women and men. And there's a few others, you know, there was a constitutional amendment to abolish alcohol and then a constitutional amendment to put it back on. So we haven't had amendments shortly. And I did another talk on this with you, Ron. Oh, I can't remember which one it was, but they're trying, we can either create amendments through Congress with states ratifying, and it takes 3/4, which is 38 out of the 50 states, or we can get the states to pass resolutions by each state wanting to hold a constitutional convention. Again, needs 38 out of 50 states. And the constitutional convention can be on one item, or it can be on multiple items. It can be open-ended. 34 states have passed resolutions to have a constitutional convention to make the United States balance its budget. I'm not for that, because when you have recessions, you need a government to be able to spend itself into debt to restart the economy. But always in the past, we would then pay the debt off. Well, in the last 2 decades, we've stopped doing that. Of course, if you really want to extrapolate it even more, why did we give away the right to coin money to a private Federal Reserve rather than Congress keeping it themselves? Big subjects, and you can go look at my various forecasting webinars if you want to find more to that. So here we are with the Mars retrograde, just doing a little bit of visionary work. And looky here, the Constitution has Mars at 29 degrees Aquarius. Let's see what's in the news after Mars retrograde, when it gets just before it goes into Pisces, which again will, be right around mid-November. Just a couple more slides. A couple of questions that I always like to put out at the end. What desires have I exhausted? How do I detach from the upsets in life in order to understand why it happened? Aquarius squared to Scorpio. How do I quiet my mind in order to intuit the best actions forward? How do I take responsibility for my life and my circumstances? How do I honor my emotional needs in relationship? How do I find the courage to be a group of one? How do I create fairness with everyone I encounter? And just in case you're interested, I even researched the future Mars retrograde cycles. As you can see, this is the last one in the zodiac. And 2 years from now, we're going to have the U.S. presidential election with the Mars retrograde. We're going to have the 2022 midterms with Mars retrograde. So Mars is going to be active in the U.S. national elections for a few more cycles yet. All right, that's all my slides. I am kind of taking it just a little easy this summer. I do have our Mercury retrograde that I talked about planned for Monday, July 23rd. They're always 6 to 8 p.m. Mountain Time. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer questions. I don't even know really what time it is. Okay, hey, I did it. Comments, questions? Leroy.
Well, we've had some good interaction on the board, but I think we're clear. A lot of good content. Thank you for the work.
I just saw a hand come up.
Let's see. Let's see if somebody's mic'd. Should we try that?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Liv. Are you on?
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you so much for all of your work. I've learned so much and I'm grateful. It was very informative. And the one question is, will this video be available so I can look at the charts and keep learning?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna process all that tonight, Liv, and we'll kind of create the MP4 video file of tonight's webinar, and we'll add a couple of audio files, a download and a streaming MP3 file. And that'll be on the first page of a PDF that will be distributed, everybody, from the webinar service. So be looking for a follow-up email in 24 to 48 hours from the webinar service that will contain the recording, the actual webinar, and then I'll also make the effort to send out that PDF, the PDF as well, with those links and all the slides in a separate email. So yes, you'll have some more content coming from us, so we give a lot of value here. And Kim just showed it on the screen there. That's what that first page will look like.
This is always the first page of any of the PowerPoint slides. And so that first page will have the link to YouTube that you can just go watch it. Leroy prepares an audio link in case you want to be able to just listen. And then he creates an audio download link in case you want to put it on your smartphone and walk the dog.
Well, that's really handy because I have to walk the dog twice a day. So that's great.
There you go.
So much. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you. Anybody else? Questions, comments?
I guess we can acknowledge one person here that talks about these repeating themes that you looked at and went over quite, you know, in the whole presentation. Uranus appears to square the nodes with Mars, of course, and you know, within orbit of the South Node during the entire retrograde. What's the significance of Uranus square Mars in the nodes, especially in light of the lunar eclipse?
Well, Uranus square the nodes has the potential to create skip steps in deconditioning and liberating. So when a transiting planet is squared the transiting nodes in the sky, that planetary archetype must be addressed. Everyone must address it, or they could create that as skip steps in a future time period in this life, the next time it's square the nodes, or they could set it up as a planet square the nodes in a future life. So Uranus square the nodes is asking all of us to objectify, to see the larger picture, to really understand what is unique to each of us. Because when you look at Uranus, you know, before Uranus was discovered, the old ruler of Uranus was Saturn. Saturn ruled Capricorn and Uranus. And that part of Uranus, you know, we have three reactions.
The old ruler of Aquarius, you meant, of course, yeah.
Old ruler of Aquarius. Thank you. The three reactions to change, the one is to resist. That's the Saturn part of Aquarius that says, I don't want to grow. I don't want things to change. I want my security. And so with Uranus square the nodes, we have to look at where we are resisting changes. And we have to really be working to objectify. Now, the beauty of the Mars retrograde in Aquarius Capricorn is it's shaking it up so much that it's harder and harder to sit on the fence socially. It's harder to deny who you are, you know, because again, Mars retrograde is the leading edge of who we're becoming, and we're meant to be reviewing that leading edge of who we are becoming. So Uranus in Taurus square the nodes can lead a little bit into that resisting change, because Taurus always wants to be secure. And as I've said throughout that whole Uranus series I did this spring, it says wherever Uranus and Taurus is in your chart, in your whatever house it's transiting, it will take all of the archetypes of that house and it will pull the rug out underneath them. It will create insecurity around resources in general. It will shake up the resources in general on a broad collective level for better distribution. But that doesn't mean that we can't go through upsets and just kind of want to hunker down and not change. So I think the fact that it's Uranus in Taurus, it's still going to disrupt things. and the Mars retrograde, it's going to disrupt things. So you want to be reaching for inner security, Taurus. And you want to be reaching to deepen self-love, North Node in Leo. So that whatever Mars is activating on the South Node, it's not traumatizing you. It's not paralyzing you. You know, it's not whether or not the trauma happens. They happen. Everybody dies. But it's how we respond to the event or situation. Do we have the mental capacities, Uranus, to broaden our perception of understanding why it happened? You know, have you ever had those situations where, you know, you literally go into shock and it feels like time stands still? And it feels like your mind, you know, for some people, the mind will literally shut down. For others, the mind will just start going, why? And you want that why. You want that pondering. You want that ability to process through the traumatic event or situation so it doesn't create a closed circling loop of being stuck in the trauma. So Uranus square the nodes through, you know, the last 7-8 months of this year is just all about being able to detach and objectify whatever's going on in your world and find that inner security, Taurus, and self-love, Leo. Okay, and I'm saying self-love, Leo, because the North Node's in Leo. Okay, so yeah, individually, you know, we're all get some degree of upsets, and collectively, you know, who knows what will happen? You know, will we have a major earthquake? Will we, you know, have major hurricanes again? The hurricanes are going to get stronger and slower and dump more rain. They already see the pattern going. So, you know, island living people, will they be able to continue to live on the islands? What is Houston going to do? What is Florida going to do when the sea level rises 6 feet? And so, you know, we're all going to experience individually, collectively. And how can we just educate ourselves, Aquarius? Be aware of the change we want to see. Uranus square the nodes. It's asking all of us to become socially active. Not just pretend this isn't happening because you have a cushy, comfy job and a nice house and plenty of food. That's, you know, it's asking all of us from the poorest to the richest and everything in between to be active in what we want to see happen on planet Earth moving forward. Climate change. Every single one of us are affected by it. And we have to be active. We have had, we live in the mountainous West. We had rain this weekend. We had rain the weekend before. The first weekend, we got just shy of 5 inches of rain. Last weekend, we were just shy of 4 inches of rain. So in less than 10 days, we've had half of the rain we get in an entire year. Mm-hmm. Everybody will have the effects of climate change. And Uranus in Taurus, it's going to be waking up Uranus and taking care of the Earth. I can just get on my soapbox.
Be the change you want to see for the world.
Yeah. Yes. I was born with Uranus square the nodes. And so, you know, I've been studying this one my whole life. Breaking free and getting out of my little Mars in Libra shyness and get along with everybody, and, you know, finding that Aries polarity courage to just initiate my own stuff. And so Uranus square the nodes, I've just been having to liberate and be who I am. Take it or leave it. And I'm getting better and better at it. But I'll still use Mars in Libra and speak as politely as I can unless somebody really triggers me emotionally.
We'll be looking for the PDF coming in a separate email from MediaMonk at evolutionaryastrology.net. Also use that email address for any questions on our EA course materials. We are accepting summer enrollments, getting access to all these archives of these webinars that we're producing with your enrollment by purchasing materials of the course. So become an EA associate if you choose. And until next time, continue to move with joy and passion on that never-ending and exciting journey to the core of your soul. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and being with us tonight.